I'm Meredith Lawson, 36 years old and CEO of a sustainable farming tech company that's been featured in Forbes and agricultural trade journals across the country. But standing outside my parents' farmhouse in rural Nebraska, holding a carefully wrapped birthday gift, none of that seemed to matter. My brother Mark gave a nod toward the equipment shed and said, "You should probably park around back. Use the kitchen entrance. 10 years of building a multi-million-dollar business, and I was still being sent through the service door like a hired hand." But later that night, someone walked in, asked for Madam CEO, and changed everything. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove your worth to your own family. I grew up on 800 acres of farmland just outside Beatrice, Nebraska. Corn, soybeans, wheat, our entire lives revolved around those fields. My dad, Thomas Lawson, was a third-generation farmer, and in his mind there was one way to do things the old way. My brothers Mark and Daniel were always meant to take over the farm. That was the plan since before any of us could walk. I was just the daughter. I'd marry someone local, maybe a school teacher or a vet, and settle into a quiet life nearby. But I loved the land. I loved the smell of fresh-turned soil in spring, the hum of irrigation lines in late summer, the changing sky right before a storm. And more than anything, I loved understanding how things worked, how we could do better, waste less, grow smarter. The problem was, no one wanted to hear that from me. When I was 8, I asked if I could learn to drive the tractor like Daniel. Dad didn't even look up from his ledger. He just said, "That's not for girls, Meredith. You won't need that kind of skill where you're going." I didn't understand what he meant until later. Mark, just a year younger than me, was already learning how to repair the irrigation pump and rotate crop schedules. I was told to help Mom in the kitchen. Now my mother Linda was a kind woman. She had this way of keeping the peace, smoothing over whatever storm Dad stirred up. But she had grown up the same way, quiet, dutiful hands, always busy with things no one noticed. She loved me, I know that for sure, but love wasn't enough to undo the rules our family lived by. By the time I was 13, I had built a makeshift greenhouse using old windows, plastic sheeting, and leftover wood from the shed. It sat just past the back field. I saved my allowance and ordered seed samples from catalogs growing tomatoes and peppers that could handle longer drought seasons. I kept notes in a binder I hid in my closet. Dad walked by that little greenhouse every day for years and never stepped inside once. When I turned 17, I applied to the University of Nebraska's Ag Science program. I waited until after dinner one night to share the news. I still remember the sound of his fork clinking against the plate when I said I'd gotten in with a full ride. "That's a waste," he said. "No one's going to pay a woman to tell them how to farm." I told him maybe I'd run my own farm one day. He laughed, not cruelly, but the kind of laugh that says you have no idea how the world works. Then he laid it out plain. If I left for college, I shouldn't expect to come back. The land, the future, it all belonged to my brothers. That night, Mom helped me pack a small suitcase. She didn't say much. Just, "Give him time, he'll come around." But he didn't. The morning I left, Dad was already out in the fields. The bus pulled away before he even looked up. I was 18 years old, heading into a world I knew nothing about, with a heart full of questions and a mind that refused to quit. I didn't know if I'd ever see that farmhouse again. But I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't let anyone decide my worth for me. And I didn't know it yet, but that greenhouse, the one nobody had cared about, was just the beginning of everything. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the house where I'd grown up. It looked the same in some ways, the same worn shutters, the same white siding. But now the barn had fresh paint. A new silo stood off to the right, and modern machinery lined the gravel lot like trophies. Business had clearly been good for the Lawson family. Still, nothing about that success had anything to do with me. I'd chosen a navy dress, plain but neat, and low heels I could manage on gravel. The gift I brought, wrapped carefully in tissue and twine, felt heavier in my hands than it should have. A vintage model of the first tractor Dad had ever owned. I'd spent weeks tracking it down. Thought maybe it could be some kind of peace offering. Mark met me halfway up the drive, hands in his pockets. He nodded once. "You made it." "Hey, Mark," I said, stepping in like I might hug him, but he didn't move. His expression was polite. Nothing more. He glanced behind me, eyeing the rental car. "Probably best to park around back by the shed," he said. "These spots up front are for the guests." Then he motioned toward the kitchen door. "That way's clearer." He turned and walked off before I could say a word. I drove around the back like he asked, parked beside a row of equipment that looked brand new. My little rental sedan looked small and strange beside them. The field stretched out beyond, lush and green, but I didn't linger. I took the gift from the seat beside me and walked toward the back entrance. The screen door still squeaked the same way it had when I was 15, sneaking in late from the greenhouse. Inside the kitchen smelled of lemon polish and something sweet baking in the oven. My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron dusted with flour. For a second, she just stared at me. "Meredith," she said at last, crossing the room with a soft, careful hug. "You look beautiful." "Hi, Mom," I said, holding her a little longer than she held me. "The house looks good. We had it painted last spring." Her eyes flicked toward the dining room, then back to me. "Your father will be glad you came." Someone behind her, a woman I didn't recognize, walked over carrying a tray of appetizers. "Margaret," she said to my mother, "do you want this helper to start taking things out? Folks are starting to get hungry." My mother's face went pale. "No, Barbara. This is my daughter, Meredith." Barbara's face changed quick from confusion to embarrassment. Oh, I'm sorry. I just assumed—" "It's fine," I said. "Mark told me to come through the kitchen." Barbara's smile was tight, sympathetic. Worse than her mistake. "Well, the party's through there. Your father's in the living room." I nodded. "Thanks." The dining room had been decorated wall to wall with old family photos. Dad as a boy holding a fishing rod. Dad at 20 in front of the first corn harvest. My brothers at county fairs driving the combine holding up ribbons. I looked at each frame in turn. By the time the photos reached my senior year of high school, I disappeared entirely. No pictures of my graduation, no shot of me with my college acceptance letter. It was as if I had stopped existing the day I left. The living room was packed. Neighbors, business associates, cousins. Laughter and conversation filled every corner. I saw Dad near the fireplace standing tall, a glass in his hand. Jason stood beside him, talking with a man I recognized from the old grain elevator company. No one saw me at first. I stepped through the room accepting a glass of punch from a passing tray, pretending not to notice the double takes. Some smiled politely, but most didn't seem to know who I was. Jason noticed me first. His voice broke through the noise. "Dad, look who's here." Dad turned his face unreadable. "Meredith," he said, not warmly, not coldly, just my name. "You made it." "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, offering the wrapped box. "I thought you might like this." He took it without opening it, setting it behind him with the others on the mantel. "Thank you for coming," he said. Then he turned away. Continued the conversation like I hadn't spoken. Jason gave me a quick pat on the shoulder. "Good to see you, Mare. Karen's around here somewhere. You haven't met her yet." "I'd like to," I said. "We've got 2 boys now. Tyler's 7, Michael's 4. I didn't know I was an aunt." Jason hesitated. "Well, we don't exactly keep in touch, do we?" "That goes both ways," I said quietly. He shifted. "Anyway, enjoy the party. Curtis said he was looking for you earlier." He walked away. The next hour passed in a blur. I met Karen, who was polite. and Curtis's wife Stephanie, who smiled a lot but didn't seem to know what to say to me. Curtis introduced me as the one who runs the, plant business. Agricultural technology, I said. We design sustainable systems for water conservation and crop health. Stephanie tilted her head. So it's just a small operation then. We have 47 employees across 12 states, I said. Our systems are used on over 500 farms. She blinked. Well, that's something. Your father talks all the time about how the boys expanded the farm 1,200 acres now. He's so proud. Dinner was called not long after. I was seated at the far table with neighbors and acquaintances I barely remembered. The main table, my parents, brothers, their wives, and kids sat near the fireplace, close to the photos, close to the man we were all supposedly celebrating. Throughout the meal, I heard conversations about the harvest, new machinery plans for expansion. No one asked about my work. No one even glanced my way. After dessert, I slipped out to the back porch. The sun had dipped low, fireflies blinked in the fields, and the evening air carried a quiet hum. I leaned against the railing and breathed in deep. I didn't want to cry, not over this, not here. The screen door creaked open behind me. Jason stepped out, hands in his pockets. "If you're coming back in," he said, "use the kitchen door. Mom just had the carpets cleaned." I looked down at my boots, barely dusty from the gravel. His were covered in mud. "My boots are cleaner than yours," I said. He shrugged. "Just don't make a scene. It's Dad's party." Then he turned and went back inside. I stayed out there a while, watching the stars come out, listening to the laughter through the windows. For a moment, I thought about just getting in my car and driving away, but I didn't. When I finally walked through the kitchen again, something strange was happening. A voice cut through the noise, clear and enthusiastic. "Is Meredith Lawson here? I was told she might be attending." I stepped into the dining room just as the front door opened, and a man I recognized walked in. Marcus Thompson, president of the Regional Ag Bank, one of the most respected names in the industry. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. "There she is," he said, smiling wide. "Meredith Lawson, Madam CEO of Agritech Solutions. I've been hoping to meet you." The room went quiet. Dad stood frozen by the fireplace. Jason and Curtis exchanged glances. Marcus reached out, shaking my hand. "Your work's been extraordinary. I was just telling our board last week, we need more of your systems implemented on our client farms." "Thank you," I said, aware of the stares. "That means a lot." Marcus turned to the room. "For those who don't know, Meredith's company has changed the face of modern agriculture. Her systems increase water efficiency by over 30%, reduce cost, and improve yields." She was just on the cover of Forbes. People who hadn't looked twice at me earlier now leaned in. Richard Marcus said to my father, "You must be incredibly proud." My father didn't respond at first. Finally, he said, "Meredith has always had her own ideas about farming." That was all. Marcus kept talking. People began to approach me asking questions, requesting cards, taking note of my company. Faces that had barely acknowledged me earlier now wore new expressions. I watched from the corner of my eye. Mom looked proud. Curtis looked confused. Jason looked calculating. Dad looked like he wanted the floor to open up beneath him. And in that silence, I realized the room had changed, and I had not. I stayed near the edge of the room while conversation shifted. Guests who had ignored me just an hour earlier were now making their way over, asking questions, offering compliments, some even handing me their business cards. I answered politely the way I had in conference halls and trade expos, but something about doing it here in the house I grew up in left me feeling off balance. Curtis introduced me to a few folks from town. Jason hovered nearby, quiet but watchful. My father stood by the fireplace occasionally nodding at someone, but his eyes never settled on me again. Even when a neighbor asked him directly about the company, all he said was, "She's doing her thing," then turned the topic back to the corn yield. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride either. It felt more like I'd walked into someone else's gathering and nobody quite knew where to place me anymore. By the time the cake was brought out, most of the energy in the room had shifted away from the birthday itself. A few guests sang. My brothers flanked Dad while he blew out the candles. I watched from the back corner, still holding the punch glass I'd never finished. Afterward, I slipped outside again. The sky had gone dark, the porch light casting a soft yellow glow across the lawn. I stood by the railing, arms crossed, listening to the hum of insects in the nearby field. A screen door creaked open behind me. "Thought I might find you out here," Jason said, stepping onto the porch. I didn't turn, just needed some air. He leaned against the post a few feet away. "Quite a stir you caused tonight. I didn't plan it." I know he said, but still, people were impressed. I waited, unsure where he was going. "You should have told us," he continued, "about your company. The Forbes thing, the technology, all of it. I've been sending things home for years, Jason," I said, facing him now. "Articles, updates. I even sent brochures. Mom mentioned them sometimes." He looked down. "I guess I never read them." I nodded once. "That sounds about right." He looked past me toward the fields. "Curtis and we've been working this place for a long time, and then you show up and suddenly everyone wants your opinion." "I never asked for that," I said. "No," he admitted. "But it still happened." Neither of us said much after that. Eventually, Curtis stepped onto the porch. "They're looking for you both. Time to open gifts." "I think I'm going to call it a night," I said. Jason straightened. "You're not staying for the rest. I've been here all evening." "I don't think anyone will notice." Curtis frowned. "Dad will." I met his eyes. He barely spoke to me. Jason stepped forward. "Meredith, don't do this. Just come in for the rest. We can talk more tomorrow." I set my glass down gently on the porch rail. "I'm not doing anything. I'm setting a boundary." They both fell silent. For years, I said I've been reaching out, showing up in the ways I knew how. And tonight, the only reason anyone acknowledged me is because someone from the outside forced them to. Jason shifted. "That's not fair." "It's true," I said, "and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make everyone more comfortable." I stepped down from the porch and walked toward the back of the house. Neither of them followed. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. The sky above the highway was deep blue stars blinking between long stretches of corn and fence posts. I reached the parking lot just after 11, sat for a minute before going inside, hands resting on the steering wheel. In the hotel room, I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the unopened gift box still sitting beside me. I thought about leaving it there in the room. Instead, I took it out, removed the wrapping carefully, and placed the little tractor model on the dresser. It wasn't much, but I'd picked it for a reason. I checked the clock. It was too late to call anyone normally, but tonight didn't feel normal. I dialed Rebecca. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" I told her everything, from walking through the kitchen door to the moment Marcus Thompson shook my hand. From my father's silence to the conversation out on the porch. When I finished, she didn't rush to fill the silence. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. "You said what you needed to say. I should have stayed longer, maybe," I said. "Leaving early just proves what they already think." "No," she said. "You made a choice. You didn't leave because you couldn't handle it. You left because they wouldn't meet you halfway. We talked until after midnight. I slept for maybe 2 hours before giving up on the idea entirely. At sunrise, I was downstairs drinking hotel coffee by the window, watching the lights stretch across the flat horizon. I hadn't planned to go back, but something pulled at me, a conversation still sitting unfinished. By 7:30, I was back in the car. The gravel road looked softer in the morning light. I passed the oak trees, the mailbox, the white fence Dad had built years before. This time I parked out front. Not near the shed. Not behind the equipment. The front door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there in her robe and slippers, surprise written all over her face. "Meredith, I didn't think I have a later flight," I said, "and I wanted to talk before I left." She stepped back. "Of course. Come in. I'll make some coffee." "Actually," I said gently, "I'd like to talk to Dad too." "Is he in the workshop?" Her face changed, a flicker of concern. "Yes. But Meredith?" "I've given him 10 years," I said. "I'm not leaving without saying what I need to." She held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll go get him." I waited in the living room, the quiet wrapping around me. The house felt smaller in the morning light, more familiar, more closed in. The family portrait still hung above the fireplace, the one taken the year I wasn't invited home. When they returned, my father came in behind her slower than usual. His arms were crossed, jaw set. My mother took the chair nearest the window and stayed seated, letting us stand where we were. "I thought you'd left," he said. "I'm flying out later," I replied. "But there are things I want to say." He didn't respond, just nodded once. I looked at him. Last night made it pretty clear where I stand here. I've spent years sending letters, updates, calling Mom, and I've gotten nothing in return but silence. He started to answer, but I raised my hand. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to set things straight." My mother shifted in her seat. "Your father does care." "Then he could have picked up the phone once a year," I said. "He could have read the clippings. He could have told someone my name when they asked who I was." The words hung in the space between us. "I'm not going to use the back door anymore," I continued. "I'm not going to downplay what I've built just to make others comfortable. I'm not asking for praise. I'm asking not to be erased." He stood quietly, arms still crossed. Then finally he said, "You left. I left. I said because you gave me no choice." He looked toward the window. Outside, the wind moved slow over the corn. "I chose to learn," I said. "I chose to build something. I chose a path you didn't understand, but it was never meant to be against you." He said nothing, and then in the quiet, he said the name of my company, Agritech Solutions. Not loud, not quite steady, but he said it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. My father stood still after he said it. Agritech Solutions. He didn't look at me when he said the name, but it was the first time I'd heard it come from his mouth. I watched him carefully, waiting for some kind of expression. There wasn't much. Just a shift in his stance, the faintest hint of acknowledgement. "That's what it's called, isn't it?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "That's my company." He nodded once, but I could see the effort behind it. "I've been busy," he said almost to himself. "The farm's grown. Mark and Jason have put in long hours." "I don't doubt that," I replied. "But I could have helped too. That's what I've spent the last 10 years building ways to help farms like this one." He finally looked at me, then like he was trying to see something he hadn't noticed before. "You chose a different road," he said. "We all have to live with our choices." "No," I said. "You made that choice for me. You told me not to come back if I left for school. You told me I wasn't needed here." The room was quiet. My mother sat still in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving between us. "I've heard every version of 'you're not enough' since I was a kid," I said. "But last night confirmed it. You had a party filled with people from town, people I used to know, and you sat me at a table like I was a stranger." He shifted his weight slightly. "Curtis said you arrived late. The seating was already set. I came when Mom told me to come," I said. "And even if I had been late, there's always a seat when you want someone included." His mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. "I'm not angry," I added, my voice even. but I need you to understand something. I'm your daughter. Whether you see value in that or not, it doesn't change who I am. I'm not here to fight for a place anymore. I'm here to make it clear I already earned it." He looked toward the old window, the fields just visible through the glass. "I know how to grow things," I said. "Not just crop systems, businesses, ideas. And I didn't get that from nowhere. I got it from growing up here. Watching you run the operation, watching Mom make do with what she had. That foundation, it's part of me. But I'm not going to keep apologizing for turning it into something more." He still didn't speak. That's when Jason stepped into the doorway. "Mom said you were both in here," he said, his tone lighter than the mood in the room. "We're heading out soon. Just wanted to say goodbye before we go." He looked between us, hesitated. "Everything all right?" My father didn't answer. I turned to Jason. "Before you leave, can I ask you something?" "Sure. What's the reason you and Curtis had me park in the back yesterday, and why the kitchen door?" Jason's jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. "We didn't know what to expect, Meredith. It's been a long time. You came back and everything felt unsettled. So it was easier to keep me separate." He exhaled through his nose. "Honestly, yeah, that's exactly what it was." I nodded. "Thanks for telling me the truth." Curtis joined us a moment later, car keys in hand. He glanced at the three of us and sensed something was happening. "Sorry, should we come back later?" "No," I said. "You're here now? It's fine?" Jason turned to Curtis. "She knows. About the back entrance, the table, everything." Curtis rubbed the back of his neck. "It was stupid. We thought it would be easier that way. Easier for who I asked." They didn't answer. "We talked about this last night," I continued. "And I'm going to say it again now. If the only reason I'm invited to something is because it's polite, not because I'm really welcome, then I'd rather not be invited at all." Jason looked at the floor. "You're right." Curtis nodded. "We messed that up." My mother stood quietly, her hands now resting on the arm of the chair. "You should know something," she said. "Meredith's been sending those articles for years. I kept every one of them." My father turned to look at her. "In the closet upstairs," she said, "in a box marked with her name." He opened his mouth as if to speak, but didn't. She called every month she added. Even when you wouldn't come to the phone, she never stopped trying. The silence after that felt different. Not heavy, but full, like we had all stopped pretending. I looked at them all, my father, my brothers, my mother. "I'd like to see the greenhouse before I go," I said. "The one behind the field. Is it still there?" My father nodded slowly. "It's there. No one's touched it since you left. I'd like to see it alone if that's all right." No one objected. My mother nodded gently. As I stepped out the front door, I felt something shift, not entirely peace, but something like air returning to a room that had gone too still. The grass along the path was high, brushing against my calves, as I made my way through the back field. The greenhouse stood just where I remembered, though the frame was weathered and the plastic sheeting had gone cloudy with age. I opened the door and stepped inside. Dust coated the old shelves, and the corners smelled of dried wood and soil. Bits of tubing from old irrigation experiments still hung from hooks on the wall. And there in the back left corner something green pushed through the clutter. A single plant. I crouched beside it, brushing the soil lightly with my fingers. One of the drought-resistant tomato varieties I'd cultivated as a teenager, still alive, still growing. I took a cutting and wrapped it gently in a damp paper towel from my bag. I stood slowly and looked around the space one more time. This was where everything had started. When I stepped out into the morning sun, I saw them, my family, waiting by the house. They didn't say anything. They didn't wave, but they didn't walk away either. It wasn't a finish line, but it might have been the starting point of something different. I drove back to Omaha that afternoon with the greenhouse cutting resting in a damp paper towel beside me. A small thing, but something to carry forward. The days that followed fell back into their usual rhythm. Conference calls, staff meetings, design reviews. We were working on a new soil sensor package, and I stayed busy, too busy to think much about what had shifted back at the farm. 6 months later, I got a phone call. Not from Mom this time. It was my father. The message was short. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to take a look at their irrigation setup. Said they were thinking about modernizing. Asked if I could stop by the farm. I called him back the next morning. Sure, I said. I can make time. It was early March when I pulled into the gravel driveway again. The frost was just beginning to lift off the ground, and the fields looked quiet under the pale sun. This time, no one told me where to park. My father stepped out of the house before I even shut off the engine. "Good drive?" he asked, meeting me halfway. "Pretty smooth," I said. "The fields look like they're waking up." He nodded once. "We'll see how the spring goes." We walked the western edge of the property where runoff had always been a problem. He explained what they'd been dealing with low-pressure issues, uneven coverage root loss. I listened, asked a few questions, took notes. When we got back to the house, he gestured toward the kitchen. "You hungry?" I hadn't expected to stay long, but I followed him inside. My mother was already setting out a plate of sandwiches. "I made turkey," she said. "Your favorite, right." We sat at the table I'd grown up around. Same wood grain, same faint heat marks from old casserole dishes. The conversation stayed technical, moisture levels, nitrate retention unit costs. But the tone had shifted. There was something in my father's voice I hadn't heard before. Maybe respect, maybe something like it. Toward the end of lunch, he said, "Your mother tells me your company won another award." "We did," I said. "Environmental innovation in agriculture. It's for our moisture sensors." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "That's good work." 2 words, that's all. But coming from him, they carried weight. After that visit, things started to change, slowly but noticeably. He began calling once a month to check on the system installation, and sometimes the conversation drifted a little beyond that. My mother visited my office twice that spring. She brought cinnamon cookies on the first trip and strawberry jam the next. Sat in on a team meeting and whispered to me afterward, "I wish your father could see this." My brother started reaching out too, short emails at first, questions about crop selection, inquiries about runoff mitigation. A little tentative but consistent. They weren't asking because someone told them to. They were asking because they genuinely wanted to know. It wasn't a fairy tale shift. There were still awkward silences, still moments when someone said something that made the old ache resurface. But the difference now was that those moments didn't sit unchallenged. They passed, and we kept moving forward. That summer, Rebecca convinced me to start therapy. I was hesitant at first too much to do too many deadlines, but I went. And the more I talked, the more I started to understand just how much of my drive had been shaped by the feeling of being unwanted. Not by strangers, but by the people I had once loved the most. Talking it through didn't erase the past, but it helped loosen its hold. I stopped trying to rewrite what had happened and started figuring out how to live with it differently. And then I started thinking bigger. I remembered what it had been like as a teenage girl in a farm town passionate about agriculture, but pushed away from it. I knew I wasn't the only one. I could name 5 girls from my hometown who loved the land, but ended up settling for something safer because no one had told them they were allowed to do more. So I launched the Rural Innovation Scholarship. It was simple at first, just a small fund to help girls from farming communities attend ag tech programs, but it grew quickly. I paired it with internships at Agritech, brought in mentors from across the industry, and watched something new take shape. The first scholarship recipient, Anna from Kansas, sent me a letter I still keep in my drawer. She said her high school counselor told her farming wasn't for girls. Then she found us. That fall, just before Thanksgiving, my mother called with an invitation. "We're hosting dinner here," she said. "Everyone's coming. Jason and Mark, their families, the kids." I waited, knowing there was more. Your father specifically asked if you were coming. It was quiet for a beat. I'll be there, I said. That morning I pulled into the driveway just as Mark's truck was unloading his kids. No one gave me directions. No one mentioned the back door. My mother opened the front door before I could knock. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart," she said, pulling me in. Everyone's in the living room. The house felt the same wood-polished cranberry candles, but something inside it had changed. Jason's boys, Tyler and Michael, were on the rug building a fort out of couch cushions. Curtis's little girl, Lily, peeked out from behind the recliner and smiled shyly. My father sat in his usual chair reading glasses, unholding a packet of soil data I'd emailed last week. "Aunt Meredith's here," Jason said, standing to greet me. "Come on in." Curtis walked over with Lily. "Remember who we told you about," he said gently. "This is your Aunt Meredith. She makes the smart water systems for Grandpa's farm." Lily stared up at me. "Do you make tractors too?" I knelt beside her. "No, just water systems, but tractors are pretty cool, huh?" Tyler chimed in from across the room. "Dad says your system saves money." His mother winced. "Tyler." "It's okay," I said, smiling. "He's right. It does." My father looked up then. "Her system boosted our yield 14% this season," he said like he was reading from a report. The room was quiet for a moment. He met my eyes. There was no big announcement, no grand speech, just a plain statement of fact delivered by a man who didn't give praise unless it was earned. And that made it feel real. We moved into the dining room. Everyone sat where they wanted. I didn't check to see what table I was at. This time, I didn't need to. After dinner, folks drifted into the living room, some with pie plates still in hand, others carrying coffee cups or settling into conversation. The kids had gone back to their board games on the floor. I stepped into the hallway for a moment, needing a bit of quiet before saying my goodbyes. The study door was slightly open. I knocked once, then peeked in. My father was there seated at his desk, soil reports spread across the surface. He didn't look surprised to see me, just motioned to the chair across from him. "The irrigation system's holding steady," he said, pushing his glasses up. "Moisture readings came in this morning. Good numbers." "I saw," I said. "We're seeing consistency across all 12 monitored zones." He nodded. "That's a first for us, Western Edge especially." I waited a beat before speaking. "I'm glad it's working. It was a big shift, I know." He glanced toward the window, then back at the papers. "Farming's changed. The methods I learned from my dad, some of them don't hold up anymore. Climate's different. Timing's tighter." I watched him closely. "What you've built," he said, his voice steady, "it's good. Better than I expected. It's real." There was a quiet between us, thicker than silence, but not heavy. "You were right to leave," he continued. "Even if I couldn't see it then, I didn't say anything. We should have found a way to include you. You had ideas, and we didn't listen." He looked down at his hands, fingers resting on a faded notebook. "It wasn't just about tradition," he said finally. "It was about control. You weren't following the plan, and I didn't know what to do with that." I took a slow breath. I wasn't trying to take anything away. I just needed room to grow. He gave a faint nod. "Your mother kept every clipping you ever sent. I didn't read them at the time. But she made me sit down and go through them after you came back from the birthday party." My chest tightened at the image. "She even made a photo album," he added. "From your conferences, your awards, that greenhouse article." He gave a small laugh, not bitter, just low. "You look like you did when you were 13. Out there in the backyard with seed trays and no instructions. We were quiet for a while. Then I stood. "I'm heading out soon. Just wanted to say thank you for the invitation." He stood as well, slower than before. "Will you be back?" "I've got a conference in Chicago next month," I said. "Could stop through on my way home." "The Eastern field needs a second season check." He nodded. "Your mother would like that. The boys, too." He paused. "I would, too." Outside, the sun had already dipped, casting long shadows over the driveway. My rental car sat beside my brother's trucks. No one had asked me to move it. In the front yard, my nephews ran circles around a leaf pile, while Curtis and Jason stood chatting over coffee. Karen called to the kids from the porch. Mom stepped outside to join her, a light jacket draped around her shoulders. As I loaded my things into the car, my father walked with me, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "that little plant you brought back from the greenhouse, your mother says it's in your office now." "It is," I said. "Still growing. We're building out a whole line based on it." He gave one slow nod. "Didn't expect it to last all those years," he said. "Neither did I." We stood there a moment longer. Then I opened the car door. "See you soon?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "See you soon." As I pulled onto the gravel road, I looked once in the mirror. My father was still standing there, not waving, but not walking away either. The drive home was quiet, just the hum of tires and the glow of passing headlights. Somewhere around the county line, I reached over and touched the packet beside me, the folder for the Eastern Field Report. But tucked beside it was something else. A small envelope with my mother's handwriting on the front. Inside was a photo, me at age 14, standing in front of the greenhouse with my arms crossed, tomato plants shoulder high behind me. The image was sun-faded. My face was half in shadow. But I looked proud. On the back, in soft blue ink, she'd written, "You always knew." I kept that photo in the top drawer of my office. Every now and then, I'd open it just for a second and glance at the 14-year-old version of me standing in front of the greenhouse, hands on her hips, sleeves rolled up the wind, lifting her hair ever so slightly. She looked like she belonged to the earth she was working, and she looked sure of it. The months after Thanksgiving moved in quiet steps. Some calls with my father were still stiff, mostly technical, but they came without prompting now. Sometimes twice a month. Once he asked for my opinion on a new seed supplier. Another time he asked for help reviewing their precision yield maps. My mother sent more preserves. My nephews drew pictures of tractors and irrigation lines and labeled the figures Aunt Meredith's machines. Curtis even forwarded a grant opportunity for sustainable ag upgrades and said, "Thought this might be something your team could help us with." Small things, but steady. By spring, I was back on the farm walking field boundaries with Jason and Curtis, clipboard in hand, talking through equipment layouts. The dynamic had changed. They didn't cut me off. They didn't talk over me. They listened, asked questions, jotted notes. And for the first time in a long while, we worked side by side, not as a family trying to tolerate one another, but as peers trying to get something right. That summer, we launched the greenhouse expansion together, my company managing the install, the farm handling local logistics. It was practical, professional, and it worked. Meanwhile, at Agritech, the Rural Innovation Scholarship was gaining traction. The year before, we'd accepted 6 students. This year, we funded 15, girls from farming towns in Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, many of them first-generation college students. They arrived bright-eyed and eager, some quiet, some bold, all of them determined. We paired them with mentors, ran them through summer labs, and sent them out to field sites where they saw their coursework in action. I watched one of them, Leah, a junior from Indiana, run a drone assessment like she'd been doing it her whole life. She turned to me afterward and said, "I didn't know I could love this much about dirt." It stayed with me. By fall, my team and I were preparing for a presentation at the National AgTech Summit. I'd been invited as a keynote speaker, the first woman under 40 to hold that spot. We were finalizing slides the day the call came through. It was my mother. She asked if I could come home. Not for a meeting, not for business, just come. I arrived the next morning. My father had injured his leg getting off the combine 2 days before. He'd refused to go to the hospital, of course, but Mom had insisted on rest and observation. He was in the living room when I walked in, leg propped up on a stack of folded blankets, a notebook open in his lap. "Sprain," he said as I entered. "Nothing serious." I sat across from him. "Then you won't mind if I take a look at your new field data while I'm here?" He grunted softly. "Be my guest." We worked through the spreadsheets just like we had so many times in recent months. It felt familiar now, a kind of rhythm. But then he closed the notebook. "There's something I've been meaning to say." I waited. "I was wrong," he said, "about a lot of things." He didn't look at me when he said it, just stared straight ahead. "We needed your ideas. All along. The farm, the boys, me. We needed them, and we couldn't see it. The house was quiet. Even the old wall clock seemed to pause between ticks. I missed too much," he added. "Graduations. Your company's first launch. That big award." "I know," I said. Not harsh, just honest. He nodded. "And I can't change that." We sat that way for a moment. "But you're here," he said, voice quieter now. "Still here." I let that settle. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the field proposal I'd been working on. "We're piloting a new soil regeneration process. You could be the first in the state to try it." He smiled faintly. "Send it over." Later that afternoon, I helped my mother organize boxes in the upstairs hallway. She paused beside the linen closet and pulled down a large container. Inside were the clippings she'd mentioned. Magazine spreads, articles, photos, conference programs with my name listed in bold. She'd even printed out screenshots from the Agritech website. "I didn't know where else to keep them," she said, "but I couldn't throw them away." I flipped through them slowly. One of the pieces had a photo of me standing in the original greenhouse, long before the paint had peeled, long before the walls had sagged. "I looked at these when I missed you," she said. I put my hand on hers. "Thank you." When I came back downstairs, Curtis and Jason were in the yard with their kids. Jason waved me over. "Hey, Meredith," he called. "You got a second?" We stood by the tool shed, the kids chasing each other in the distance. "Look," Jason said, shifting his weight. "I've been thinking about how things used to be, how we handled stuff. I was proud and jealous, and I didn't know how to make room for both." Curtis chimed in. "Same here." I nodded. "You don't have to explain it all. We're here now." "Yeah," Jason said, "but we want to get it right this time." Then he held out a key. I looked at it. "The back door," he said. "You won't need this anymore." Figured it was time. I took it, turned it over in my palm, and slipped it into my pocket. The sky was just starting to shift pink at the edges, the kind of Nebraska evening that carries the weight of old stories and the promise of new ones. The last time I stood in that backyard, I was 18 bags packed, eyes still puffy from crying, heart heavy with the sound of a slammed door behind me. That night, the world felt cold and final. But now, standing there again with a key in my pocket and dusk painting the sky in soft streaks of amber and rose, everything felt different, not fixed, not perfect, but softer around the edges. The boys, Jason's and Curtis's kids, ran barefoot across the lawn, their laughter trailing behind them like ribbons in the wind. My mother came out holding a tray of lemonade, and my father followed with a cane he barely used, insisting he didn't need help. He nodded at me as he passed, then said over his shoulder, "The West Field needs a new rotation plan. Might need your system sooner than we thought." There was no ceremony in it, no dramatic apology, but it was the first time he'd spoken to me like a partner. That was enough. Later, as the sun dipped below the cornfields and the fireflies came out one by one, I sat alone on the back steps, watching the light shift across the yard. My mother joined me after the others had gone inside. She didn't say much, just rested her hand lightly on mine. "It's good you came back," she said. "I almost didn't." "I know." We sat that way for a while. No more words. just the kind of silence that says everything that needs saying. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something new. My company kept growing, and the farm started slowly integrating some of our systems. Not all at once, but the doors were open now. I met with Jason regularly, sometimes in town, sometimes on the farm, and Curtis started calling for advice often under the pretense of just checking in, and my father, well, he sent a letter, a handwritten note on thick paper folded neatly, no greeting or signature, just one line. You were right about the tomatoes. I kept it in the same drawer as the old greenhouse photo. It took years to get here. Years of silence, of rejection, of proving and reproving myself in rooms I never should have had to earn a seat in. But I found my way not by changing to fit their mold, but by growing beyond it. Some families hand down land, others pass down names. Mine handed me doubt. And somehow, I turned it into something that could feed thousands. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own story, just know this: the roots you plant in truth, in grit, in quiet persistence, they grow. Even if no one's watching, even if the people who should have believed in you never do, you still get to become who you were meant to be. Thanks for sitting with me through this. If any of this felt familiar, or if it made you think of your own path, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment, or just share this with someone who needs it. And if you're still out there fighting to be seen, keep going. Your moment is coming.